Spirit. A lot of people know me as DJ Blonde Spirit because I like to do DJing, and I live in London. I'm Irish British. I'm just reading the questions. So, how did you come to realise and identify as a transgender woman? My story is a bit unusual because I was actually born intersex and nobody told me. So I found out sort of in my teens. I was going to a lot of hospitals, seeing a lot of psychiatrists, and then I found out that was what the problem was in terms of my gender. So I wanted to get some support to do something about it. However, I'm 44, so we're now living in the age of like trans everything. But back then it was very difficult. People sort of, trans was more of a sexual fetish. It wasn't seen as an identity. And there just weren't very many trans people about. Can you speak to your experience with transitioning and any obstacles you had to overcome? So when I decided to transition, I knew that I needed to stop drugs, I needed to stop partying. I basically got an internship working in a homeless charity and set up my own project working with the trans homeless community in London called Project Silverfish. We named that after Alex Silverfish, who committed suicide. She was an amazing trans woman and DJ, and she committed suicide because of her neighbours abusing her, and that was what made me set the charity up. Can you speak to any discrimination or challenges you have faced as a transgender woman? I mean, you know, I think we live in an age where it's really fashionable to be a victim and to dwell on negative aspects of our experience, such as discrimination. And I would like to say that I actually just feel very lucky that I live in a country where you can transition, because as we know, there are people in countries all over the world who are persecuted and they can't transition. So yeah, I've been discriminated against. Yeah, I've been raped. Yeah, I've you know, had issues with work and housing, domestic violence, all of those things. And yes, it was related to being trans. But I think for a lot of women, this is a typical woman's life. You know, women do experience these things, whether they're trans or not. How do you navigate dating and relationships as a transgender woman? So for me, sex is a difficult subject because being intersex, I wasn't able to achieve the best results down there. I am post-op. Nobody really tells you how difficult that's going to be or the complications you're going to have. I've had a lot of surgery, which leads to a lot of trauma and a lot of sort of shame around your body. So relationships have never been a problem for me because I'm more platonic, sort of a tactile kind of person. And sex is not important to me. I think anyone who's post-op and, you know, who's down the hormone route, you don't have those levels of testosterone that you had before. So it's not really something, you know, if anything, I just prefer family life. So can you talk about any support systems or resources that have been helpful to you as a transgender woman? You know, I think the government that we have in the UK at the moment is really difficult because they're taking away a lot of support and resources for everyone, regardless of what gender identity you are. But I also think within the community, there's a lot of division nowadays because the whole sort of trans thing has become a very fashionable thing where people say they're transgender and they don't have dysphoria. Me personally, I don't understand how that works. I don't think anybody would choose to be trans. And I also don't believe in this idea that someone's a trans medicalist if they have hormones and surgery, because if you're genuinely trans, you would want hormone and surgery because you want to live in your desired identity and feel comfortable. So I think there's a lot of politics involved nowadays which we didn't have to deal with before. as a community before we were dealing with society, now we're dealing with you know, the way I feel is that our community's been kind of hijacked because it's like a sort of fashionable statement. Now I'm trans. As I said, you know, it's really fashionable to be a victim these days. So anybody's sort of like, well, you know, if I can be a marginalised victim, why don't I go down that route? I'm not really cool with all that because I think, you know, people are people, and identity politics can get a little bit murky. You know, I just think just respect people for who they are, and get on with it. I don't make such a big deal about being trans, like it's not that important to me. Can you speak to your experiences with healthcare as a transgender woman? So I've had some very negative experiences. Before I had surgery, as I said, I was born intersex, so going to female clinic and nurses refusing to treat me because they'd never seen an intersex patient before. When I had gender reassignment, the nurses in Charing Cross were very transphobic, very religious, and, you know, I overheard them saying stuff which was very unprofessional. And when I complained about that, I was made out to be the person who was in the wrong. I've had private healthcare when I've needed it as well, and that was always much better, but of course that comes with a cost. How do you feel about the current political climate and the impact on the transgender community? Well, I think, you know, again, this is going to be a very controversial statement, but I feel as long as we're going down the route where anyone can self-ID as transgender, we are opening the door for people who are not transgender to abuse that, and it makes real transgender people look very bad. And I can say that as someone who's older, who's experienced, who's worked within homeless communities, prison communities, chaotic communities, worked with sex offenders. There are people out there that will say they are trans when they are not. And that doesn't mean we are discriminating against trans people. What it means is, for me, that if we open the door that anyone can say they're trans and access women's spaces, not only does that create a rift between cis women and trans women, it also allows anybody to call themselves trans. And then what comes with that is, if anybody commits a crime, our whole community is shamed by that. And I've been shamed for having that opinion, but my opinion is coming from experience. And you don't have to agree with me. You know, that's the other thing. We live in a world where if people don't agree with you, they want to cancel you. And unfortunately, you know, we are living in a very unusual time where there are lots of people with lots of voices. And I think, you know, everybody's valid and everybody should be heard. And I don't think everybody in the community is being heard or validated at the moment, especially older transsexual people who have gone through a medical process. Can you speak to your experiences with the media and representation of transgender individuals? So, I mean, I think the people that are being pushed in the media are more non-binary people and gender fluid people. You don't often see transsexual people in the media. And when you do, they're often played by men. I mean, cis women or men, not trans women. And, you know, again, I feel this is a political agenda because it's not helping anyone in the sense that non-binary is nothing to do with me. I'm a woman. Anyone who's transgender, he's a woman or a man. Someone who's non-binary, they don't identify with being a woman or a man. So why is it all being thrown under this one big umbrella term? Because all that does is create conflict within the community and within the group and division. And I think that's being done on purpose. Who inspires you as a transgender woman? Well, I'm inspired by Grace Jones, strong black female feminist icon who was like traveling the world when she was 16 on her own, getting modeling jobs. I'm definitely not inspired by her roommate Jerry Hall, who married a billionaire media mogul. What a fucking sellout. Who inspires me as a, I'm inspired by all transgender women. I'm inspired by all transgender people, because it's not easy to be your authentic self when everybody's telling you your authentic self is not the real you. And it's like, but you're not in my head, you're not in my heart, you're not in my soul, you don't know me. It takes balls, pardon the pun, to be a trans woman. It really does. How do you find friends and allies as a transgender woman? I've never had problem to find friends as a trans woman or as any kind of woman. I'm not walking around with a big sign saying I'm a trans woman. I don't even think about it. I've just got on with life. I'm not going to put myself under this label and this banner. I've been through a process, and I want to move on with my life and live in my authentic self, and that is a woman. I have got loads of trans friends. I've got TV friends, transvestite friends, transsexual friends. I've got non-binary friends. I've got gender fluid friends, and I've got cis hetero friends. I don't care about all that. What do you enjoy about being transgender? This is a good question. I like the fact that you've got the perspective of both sexes and genders, so that gives you a much more rounded view on humanity as a whole, if you choose to take that experience positively. Is there anything you wish people knew about the transgender experience that they may not already know? Well, I think I just answered that. I'd like to talk about spirituality, if that's okay. How has your spiritual journey been influenced by your gender identity and transition? So I think before I transitioned, I was quite lost. I used a lot of drugs. I used to live in different countries, party lifestyle, very shallow. And when I took the steps to become my authentic self, to become a woman, full-time, that was for me a very cathartic experience, which I'll tell you the story. I was living in Australia, and a lot of people around me were using crystal meth. I didn't use it, and I felt uncomfortable, so I came home. But on the way home, I planned to commit suicide because I was really, really miserable living as a boy. And I went off to this little island on a day trip, and it was snorkeling, and I'd never done snorkeling before, and the fish were just so beautiful and magnificent, and the colours, and it was just this fish come up looking at me, and I was like, wow, nature, I'm so connected to God right now. And that was what snapped in my head. It was like, I'm going home and I'm going to do it. I'm going to live as myself. And it wasn't easy back then. We didn't have Instagram back then, or Google, and all these things, and you really walked alone, and there was a real air of suspicion around, just leaving your house. People were they would look at me like I was a burns victim. They were horrified to see this. How do you feel your spirituality connects you to the transgender community? Well, I don't. I actually think the transgender community, as I said, has been hijacked for political reasons, and the people that are being pushed on Instagram and Twitter and in the media, they don't represent me. They don't represent what I believe. I don't believe in self-ID. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that a man could enter a woman's space, someone call the police, and then they say, well, I identify as a woman. And then when I say that, people are saying, oh, that's transphobic. Well, it's not, because I'm not talking about trans women, I'm talking about men. And I've seen it on apps, guys with men's clothes and beards saying I'm a trans woman, and I'm very politely what makes you think you're a trans woman if you're comfortable walking around with a beard? And they just attack you, these people. There's no discourse, there's no, to me, the most horrific thing that could ever happen would be for a woman to be walking around with a beard. You're gonna have the worst dysphoria. Why would you do that? So I think there's a sort of appropriation happening within the younger communities of trans, of drag, biological female drag queens. Well, that's appropriation, because drag queens dressed as a girl. If you're already a girl, you were born a girl, you're walking in the street dressed up, all you're going to get is a pat on the back hey, she's wild. You're not going to get murdered. A trans woman is risking her life doing drag in the street, and that is the difference, But I get people don't like my opinion on these things. And I think people need to realise that elder communities have fought the way for people to live their lives. You know, it wasn't like this in the 90s. It's people like me that fought for you to have your right to be trans and for you to live comfortably as trans. The last question: how do you integrate your spiritual beliefs with your gender identity and expression in daily life? You know, my gender identity is female. My spiritual belief is that we are all one. We are all souls. The body is an avatar. We're just using that to gain experience within the collective and also as an individual. At some point we die, we get rid of the avatar and we take on a new avatar. So, you know, identity, for me, it was much more comfortable to be female because I have a feminine energy. But ultimately, yeah, I've been men in other lives. We've all been every gender in other lives. That's what I believe. So, you know, how I integrate that in my daily experience is compassion, and I'm compassionate to everyone, and I don't deny who I am or my past. You know, I just get on with it because I think we're being taught to be victims, and you know, this victim narrative of trans people is very disempowering. You know, trans women are warriors. We're warriors. We're warriors. So, I mean, if you take anything from this, from me, the biggest thing that we can do right now as a collective is stop arguing amongst ourselves and join together as one, regardless of whether we're trans, cis, black, white, able-bodied, disabled-bodied, non-binary, whatever. We're all one, and we are facing a common experience, which is life. And the most life-changing and the most amazing thing that we can do to change life on this planet is to basically just accept that when we hurt another, we hurt ourselves. And you know, these experiences, transgender, black, white, whatever, they are experiences. They're not who you are. Who you are is a soul. It's your energy. And you know, that's how I live my life. So hope that was a nice interview, and take care.